Good evening from Downing Street. After one of the most significant cabinet meetings of modern times, when ministers decided to support Theresa May's plans for leaving the European Union. It took 5 hours of intense debate for the cabinet to reach that decision, but the outcome is already under fire from both sides of the Brexit debate, with some MPs complaining that the UK could be tied to EU rules for years to come. The Prime Minister has warned that this draft withdrawal agreement is the best on offer. It's set to be put to MPs before Christmas, but there is no certainty that it will be approved by the House of Commons. We start with this report on the Cabinet meeting from our political editor, Laura Kuensberg. There's some flash photography coming up.
Her deal, her call, her gamble.
The Cabinet has just had a long, detailed and impassioned debate on the draft withdrawal agreement and the outline political declaration on our future relationship with the European Union. These documents were the result of thousands of hours of hard negotiation by UK officials and many meetings which I and other ministers held with our EU counterparts. I firmly believe that the draft withdrawal agreement was the best that could be negotiated, and it was for the Cabinet to decide whether to move on in the talks. The choices before us were difficult, particularly in relation to the Northern Ireland backstop. But the collective decision of Cabinet was that the government should agree the draft withdrawal agreement and the outline political declaration. This is a decisive step which enables us to move on and finalise the deal in the days ahead. These decisions were not taken lightly, but I believe it is a decision that is firmly in the national interest. When you strip away the detail, the choice before us is clear. This deal, which delivers on the vote of the referendum, which brings back control of our money, laws and borders, ends free movement, protects jobs, security and our union, or leave with no deal or no Brexit at all. I believe that what I owe to this country is to take decisions that are in the national interest. And I firmly believe, with my head and my heart, that this is a decision which is in the best interests of our entire United Kingdom.
So her deal is on. After 5 hours of talks, a pact has been sealed that could determine her future, the government's future, and of course, all of ours. But it was not smooth or unanimous. They might have reached a collective decision.
Are you resigning, Mr. Fox?
But I'm told about 10 cabinet ministers expressed reservations. Fears the agreement keeps us too close to the EU.
A cabinet united? Collective agreement.
And concerns it will never make it through the Commons. And there was no formal vote.
I'm absolutely part of the Cabinet because I'm satisfied that the deal that's currently available does meet our demands.
Why the caution?
Voilà ce projet d'accord.
Voila! Brexiteers fear the EU has got too much, tying the UK in too closely, maybe for good.
We have been able to find common ground and meet our common objectives.
There are big problems back home though. The fine print of the deal shows if there isn't a big trade agreement in future, Great Britain would be in a customs union with the EU, Northern Ireland effectively in a single market, not something Theresa May's DUP allies want to accept.
It certainly doesn't appear that we would be able to support it because it breaches the red line in terms of having differences between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. In terms of regulation, obviously we would still be in the customs union as well, and we cannot have that.
And in far greater number, if Brexiteers' suspicions about the deal are proven once they've read it properly. Here it is.
There you've got it.
I have it here. They might even pull the plug on the Prime Minister altogether.
I think this is a major problem for the government because it destroys trust. The Prime Minister made some very clear promises in her various speeches, but perhaps most importantly in the Conservative Party manifesto. One of those was we were leaving the customs union. In this arrangement we can only leave the customs union with the permission of the European Union, which is a worse situation than we're currently in.
Will you move against the Prime Minister before she has a chance to bring this to Parliament?
Well, I shall have to spend some money on some candles this evening and read carefully what the text says.
Strong voices on the right will almost inevitably be joined by resistance from the left.
I don't believe that the deal that I've heard of so far is in the national interest. It doesn't meet the needs of all parts of Britain. It doesn't give us a security of our trading relationship with Europe in the future through a permanent customs union in which we have a say.
Remember, most ministers did back Theresa May tonight, albeit without enthusiasm. The Cabinet was even rewarded with a glass of wine for their efforts at the end. But it is far, far too early for Theresa May to toast success.
Back here in Downing Street tonight, and Laura's with me. Laura, can we shed any more light on what happened in that meeting in there today?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is in the big picture, it got signed off eventually after 5 long hours, and that represents a really significant step forward for the Prime Minister, who's been grappling with all of this with such doubt, with such difficulty, with so much argument for the last couple of years. It is in that way a big step forward. But in terms of what actually happened in the room, well, it certainly was not something that was signed up to with huge enthusiasm. I'm told that about 10 ministers spoke against the deal, expressing quite strong reservations. Of course, they're slightly differing accounts. Some people who were in the room suggested to me, yes, certainly there were a lot of complaints, but nobody was sitting there suggesting a better idea. But this big political move forward has happened, it strikes me, with a sense of resigned relief rather than a full-throated hooray for what the Prime Minister has managed to achieve here. For number 10, this is a hugely important compromise that allows this bandwagon to keep rolling. But for others in the room, the fundamental problem is here, and we'll hear so much more about this in the months to come. For Brexiteers in the Cabinet, in Parliament, and maybe too in the country, this represents a closer tie to the European Union than many of them believed they'd chosen.
Laura, we'll talk a little more later on in the programme about what will come next. Which would be an interesting question as well. But for now, thanks very much. What I'd like to do now is go to Brussels and bring in our Europe editor, Katja Adler. Katja, we saw Michel Barnier give his statement earlier on. We've seen this 500-page document. But how would you characterise the kind of explanation that Michel Barnier gave today?
Well, you know what, Hugh? Gone was Mr. Fingerwagger. You know, we're used to seeing Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, over the last 19 months of negotiations, really sort of telling off the UK and warning the UK of the consequences of Brexit. Tonight it was a very different tone. Praise for UK, the great ally, the great friend. Praise for UK negotiators alongside EU negotiators who Michel Barnier said had achieved what they'd set out to do, to protect the Irish border, to protect the rights of EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU after Brexit, and to protect UK constitutional integrity as well. He said that they had managed to achieve all those things. It was almost as if, someone put it to me, they'd managed to create a beautiful Fabergé egg out of the Brexit negotiations. But could it now be smashed? I put it to Mr Barnier tonight, what plans the EU has in place if the UK Parliament now votes down the Brexit deal. He didn't want to engage in that. He didn't want to engage in the questions around this temporary customs agreement that appears in the withdrawal agreement here as part of the backstop over the Irish border. Could that become the basis for the future relationship between the EU and the UK after Brexit? Another big question is the role of the European Court of Justice, something Brexiteers wanted to be rid of, and it is very powerful in this withdrawal agreement, including in the backstop as well. And what do the EU 27 member states make of all of this? Well, the EU diplomats tonight are looking pretty ashen-faced. They don't think they're going to have a wink of sleep between now and the 25th of November, when there should be this extraordinary seal the deal Brexit summit. They need their lawyers to go through all the 585 pages of the withdrawal agreement and see whether they disagree with anything of that. And they also need to finalise that political declaration of intent of EU-UK future relationships. At the moment, if you have a look, Hugh, it's just a whole load of bullet points. There's no real content in there at all. So careful choreography that at any point, any day now, could be completely destroyed by big political problems on either side. Here, all eyes are on the UK. One EU civil servant pointing to withdrawal agreement tonight and saying, you know what, all of this could still end up in the bin.
So let's ask the question before we talk to Laura, what is likely to happen next in this process? Tomorrow, Theresa May is likely to give a statement to the House of Commons on this draft agreement that's come out today. And then, according to the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, there will be an emergency summit of EU leaders on the 25th of November, over that weekend. And then, provided all of that goes to plan, there will be a week of debate in the House of Commons on this draft agreement. And after that, a parliamentary vote probably in early to mid-December. So let's have that final word with our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. Laura, I've just gone through some of the diary items there, but how do you see these coming weeks?
Well, the political timetable might be very different to that, and in the next 24 hours there's still a possibility of some cabinet resignations. We know it wasn't a happy meeting. There could be one or two or perhaps even three of them walking out in the next day or so. There's also in the next 24 hours a possibility of an outpouring of anger from some Conservative backbenchers, which could tip the Conservative Party into some kind of leadership contest. Impossible to say right now if that's definite, but one senior MP said to me they'd be amazed if that hadn't happened maybe even by lunchtime tomorrow. There also then is the big one, the real possibility, very real, of this falling when it actually makes it to Parliament. And at that point, to quote the Prime Minister tonight, or to paraphrase perhaps, she said it is this deal or no deal, or perhaps no Brexit. Now, of course, for those people who've been campaigning, pushing very hard, politicians and activists around the country, for Brexit not to happen, for another vote to take place, curiously, ironically, they've actually had a big tick from what the Prime Minister had to say here today. But for her, that will be a message we will hear again and again in what will be 3 or 4 enormously dramatic weeks around here.
Laura, we'll talk again tomorrow. Thanks very much. Laura Kuenssberg there, our political editor here in Downing Street. That's all from the team here after that significant milestone in the Brexit process. But as Theresa May knows, better than anyone, as Laura's also already said, there's still a very long way to go.
Let us join our political editor, Robert Peston, who's preparing for a live edition of his show this evening. Robert, the Prime Minister talked of a collective cabinet decision in her statement. What really went on around the cabinet table this afternoon?
Well, when she says collective, what she means is there was a ton of dissent. Perhaps the most striking thing that happened to me this evening is that a senior minister at the forefront of that referendum to take us out of the EU, one of the senior Leavers, rang me and said that every Leave-supporting member of the cabinet attacked this deal, except for one, Michael Gove. Now, in some ways, it's extraordinary that Michael Gove was the one Brexiter cabinet minister who defended the Prime Minister because, you know, he was the most visible person during the Brexit campaign. But the point I'm trying to make is this was a deeply divided cabinet, and although we haven't seen resignations yet, I certainly don't rule out that in the next 24 hours we will see senior members of the government simply saying they cannot support this deal and resigning to campaign against it.
All right, so cabinet backing for now. What do you make of her chances of getting the backing of Parliament?
Well, when I run the numbers, I, at the moment, can't see any prospect of her getting the backing of Parliament. But frankly, she has a worse problem. I've been on the phone this evening to some of the most passionate critics of her deal from within her own party, Brexiters and Remainers, and they say to me that as they wade through the almost 600 pages of the document, they're getting angrier and angrier. And this is the big news, they think there will be a leadership challenge within days. One of them said to me the letters that would trigger a vote of no confidence will be in by lunchtime tomorrow. So her grip on office, her tenure in 10 Downing Street looking shakier and shakier.